Welcome. I'm Jessica Tietjen, and this is the Evolving to Exceptional podcast, where we talk about reaching peak performance in our workplaces, homes, and communities so that we can live our best life possible, an exceptional life. I want to welcome back our listeners to this second part of the discussion with Rhoda, where we're going to get into her background and experience and how our various life challenges can then have an impact in the workplace, and how, as leaders, we can look at how to address these in ways that create better experiences for people and actually better performance outcomes for everyone who we manage and lead in the workplace. Before we get into this next conversation, the second part of this conversation with Rhoda, I wanted to let all of our listeners know that we have an exciting new opportunity here at Evolving to Exceptional, where we have opened our performance partnership community up to anyone who wants to participate. So if you've been listening for a while and you like learning about this neuroscience-based approach to human performance and you'd like to go a little bit deeper, join some of our webinars, get on some of our group coaching calls, get some additional support, and you want to do that in a really affordable way, our partnership community is the way to do so. I want to encourage you to check it out, learn a little bit more about us, and see if it might feel like a really good fit. Now, we're going to get back into the conversation with Rhoda, where we talk about workplace trauma, where we talk about how our past experiences are impacting our present interactions, relationships, decision making, and problem solving, and how we as leaders can adjust our style in order to better support people. How have you seen that connection play out? Or how have you seen that maybe even in your own life of those experiences that you talk about and how maybe those have carried forward into, what you've noticed or what you've experienced in the workplace?
That is such a profound question. I'm tickled at myself because it forced me to think back. It has taken growth, and I'm still growing. I Ever since I was a kid, I take things very personal. Wear my heart on my sleeve. I care deeply, and you just gonna have studied trauma, so you probably know this. But I believe if you have had a lot of trauma in your life, it's gonna result to you being either very protected, stoic, and trying to preserve yourself or protect yourself, or it's gonna be you deal with it by being overly people pleaser. And that's me. And so my trauma to things that happen in the workplace or just in life in general. My son and husband, because they haven't been through what I went through, they don't see the things or experience them at the level of intensity that I do. So if I am feeling like I'm at odds with someone who's in a position of power at work, in the workplace, I that takes me down a whole different path than it would someone else who probably haven't had a lot of trauma. And so I tend to think about that a lot more. I'm usually crying in private. I'm playing out these stories in my mind. I'm thinking it's the worst possible outcome for me. I have to leave. They're gonna try to get me. I'm gonna get so all those thoughts, I'm still struggling with that today at this age. When that happens in the workplace and I feel like I've let someone down or we've had some type of conflict or they perceive me in a negative light, that is how it has showed up for me. It's very, very heavy and stressful to carry that.
Mm,
And I wish that I could retrain my brain to think differently and not react. Because often, so many times, at the end of the day, when I found out the issue was big, but in my mind, it was this big.
yeah.
And so I'm creating all this negative, catabolic energy within that's really destructive to your body. Um, and I'm stealing moments out of my life where I could be enjoying the moment and savoring the moment and happy in the moment. And I'm worrying about something that the other people have moved on. They're not even giving me a second thought. But I'm playing out this whole scenario in my head. So that's how it has impacted me in the work.
I think what you're pointing out and when you talked about there, and I share your style of what I call fawn, please
Right.
and appease. How can I keep everybody happy so that nothing stressful or bad happens and everybody always likes me and I'm always good enough and all the
Right.
things, right? How can I control everything? And that's a fawn state. And we know that there's a couple different states that people shift into, like you're talking about that we develop early in life. Fawn is one of them. Fight is
Right.
another,
Yes.
resistance, flight, running away,
Yes.
getting away from the scenario, and then freeze, where we shut down and we numb or we disassociate and disconnect.
Yes.
And I actually wrote an article this week about how there's some leaders who see these patterns or see these things
Mhm.
show up and see it as weakness or see it
Mhm.
as people being too fragile or too
Yes.
sensitive or people need to be tougher. And I think what's really important to know is that these patterns aren't, although we talk about the stories in our head, they're not actually in our head, they're in our body. They are
Yes.
unconscious and they are automatic. They are
Yes.
not something that we choose to turn on. They are
Mm.
something that our body has learned,
Yes.
and until we can clear that out of our body, until we
Mhm.
can clear that pattern or that way of being and whatever
Mhm.
caused that original pattern to form, it keeps playing out.
Yes.
And so I think sometimes we get judgmental, like, how come people can't be tougher? Well, it's not a mental game. It's a
Right.
bodied response.
Yes.
And so recognizing that that's physiological, not
Mhm.
conscious,
Yes.
and then having an understanding for how, and I think what you said is so important, right? How some people interpret the same thing very differently
Mhm.
and have bigger reactions to things
Yes.
than maybe other people do, and being aware of
Right.
that, which I think a lot of leaders really just aren't.
They aren't. Mm-mm. Yeah, I think it requires some level of A, education, but B, willingness to open your mind to, you know, I think the world thinks in black and white. You just need to be stronger. Well, it has nothing to do with my mental fortitude.
Well, and I like to say I was so strong, I shattered,
Mhm.
right? I was so strong, I toughed through everything, right? I was
Right,
I
right.
I
Mhm,
handled it.
mhm.
And then eventually your body doesn't, and it
Right,
manifests, right? It
right.
manifests in, especially for men, a lot of pain.
Mhm, mhm.
It manifests in illness and
Yes,
sickness. It manifests in conflict and
yes.
relationships, divorce, things of
Mhm.
that nature, so it's going to find its way out.
Yes,
And so really acknowledging it is the least threatening
right,
thing we can
right,
do.
right. That is so true.
How do you see this impacting or playing out in the workplace, right? In
Mhm,
terms of potentially creating further trauma or maybe
mhm,
really
mhm.
impacting people's well-being,
Right.
especially, in the challenging world we're living in today?
Mhm. Yeah, especially in the world we're living in today. The climate is kinda like triggering some trauma responses for many individuals, especially with the amount of layoffs that you're seeing and companies are getting tight on their budget because unsure about the economy. That's triggering for some. It is so critical. I believe that the organization should be hypersensitive to this and they should do all they can to support their employees and themselves because those leaders that are in charge are human too. And I'm sure they haven't, they're not superhuman. They haven't gone through the world without experiencing some trauma themselves. So to me, it requires organizations to really hone in and focus on. It's no different really than when COVID hit. Like the suicide rates went up during COVID. I personally know someone I work with that took their own life with she having a hard time finding a job, was struggling mentally and emotionally. This is no different in my opinion. It's a catastrophic for some, and in the workplace, we bring our whole self. I know people say you need to leave things if you do it. That is not realistic. We come as a whole person. And so those things can and will play out in the workplace. And we should be conscious of that. And we should be more curious, ask more questions, check in versus jumping to conclusions and reaching assumptions. But I know that it's hard for some people because see their everybody has a bubble. In their bubble, in their world they live in may have limited challenges versus someone else's world, it just may be a common thing. And so their reaction to what's happening at work is totally different than the other person. So the other person looking through their bubble and their lens, and they like, I don't get it. And then
Yeah.
this person is over here adding more stress to themselves because they're trying to help this person get it and help them understand, and they're not. So to me, it takes conscious effort on all parties, the employees and the lead, to keep well-being at the forefront.
Yeah, and I love what you said there about, like, leaving it at the door. I like to say, wherever we go, we take our bodies with us.
Yeah.
And so if we can't leave our body at home, then we can't leave the
Right,
emotion, the patterns, the nervous
right,
system reactions. We can't leave any of that behind. It's
right.
always there with us.
Yeah.
And in fact, the more that we try to suppress it,
Uh-huh.
the less able we are to connect, to solve problems, to
Yeah.
take action. Like the more we try to resist it, the
Mhm.
worse our performance gets because
Right.
we shut down those neural connections in our body that we need to make decisions and solve
Mhm.
problems and build relationships and do the things that we need to do in the workplace. And I think sometimes people are dismissive of even the word trauma.
Yeah.
I know that even when I hear it, my body naturally likes to
Mhm.
disassociate. Like, it's like, "Hoop, I don't wanna talk about that. I don't
Right.
wanna deal with that." And I have to, like, consciously work to stay present
Uh-huh.
in a conversation around it. And I think that's because we wanna distance, like, "Oh, that doesn't happen to
Uh-huh.
me. That happens to somebody else." Or
Mhm.
like, "I was fine. I'm okay.
Right.
I
Right.
I navigated it."
Mhm.
And when you talk about, the suicides during the pandemic, and
Mhm.
even recently, there's been a sharp uptick and a marked increase in depression, anxiety just this year, and substance abuse disorders as well as suicides. And they're looking at like what's going on. One of
Mhm.
the things I think that people don't necessarily realize is the trauma of the pandemic itself.
Mhm.
And that just because we survived it
Right.
doesn't mean that it didn't leave an impact on us. Doesn't mean
Right.
that it didn't trigger things from our
Mhm.
past and that it isn't still continuing to impact our present,
Right.
even a couple years in the future. And I'm
Yeah.
not necessarily talking about even the more serious traumas of
Mhm.
people getting
Right.
sick or passing away or the hospitals.
Mhm.
But even the things like just being more distanced, more
Yeah.
isolated, less connected, not being sure who to trust,
Uh-huh.
depending upon which side of the pandemic,
Yeah.
polarizing opinions you
Mhm.
were living on. And so all of that creates this residual effect.
Right.
And so, one of the things I often teach people that they don't realize is that when we have those experiences, anytime we experience like a stressful or shocking, challenging event, it
Mhm.
gets stuck in our body if we don't
Yeah.
process it out. And so all of that is still
Mhm.
stuck in most people. And
Mhm.
what we're seeing is people just bumping up against each
Uh-huh.
other's different patterns in how
Mhm.
they've navigated the challenges that existed then and continue to
Right.
exist today.
I need to do some type of detox. At least, get all the traumas and the stuff out.
That's what I've been doing for the last few
Mhm.
years is how
Mhm.
do I clear? How do I identify and then clear? How do I
Right.
identify and reprocess? And I
Mhm.
work with a company called Shift Change that does remote, anonymous, accessible EMDR therapy services, which are
Mhm.
super effective at clearing that trauma, at moving that
Yeah.
trauma out of the body. But before we can even move it, we have to recognize
Right.
that it's there and rethink some of our workplace
Mhm.
practices in that context too,
Mhm.
right? Of understanding how certain approaches
Yes.
might be triggering for
Yes.
people, and not, like, navigating them because we wanna be hypersensitive, but because we wanna keep people effective, and we
Yes.
want to keep people performing well
Mhm.
rather than getting shut down or getting
Right.
disconnected, right?
So true. So true. And to the point you just made about the workplace, it made me think about some of the things we've done at work is, and this has been all employee led. They created listening groups. And so they hold listening sessions and they have identified buddies and people they can partner with and just talk to about some of their anxiety and things that we don't think about in the workplace that these employees are experiencing outside of work as a result of our current climate.
Yeah. I love that, and I think it's amazing that it's led by
Mhm,
people,
mhm.
and also, how do we get leaders,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we get organizations to
Yeah.
really take this into consideration in how we build our systems?
Yeah. That's true human-centric leadership to me. When you recognize it's the whole person. And the other element of this is because COVID also led to some organizations going hybrid or remote. And so you have a lot of employees who are working out of their home. And when you're not on a call, that can be a sense of loneliness. It's feeling like you're on an island. That sometimes triggers some emotional challenge. So as a leader, we have to be cognizant of that. And it is our responsibility to stay connected with our employees and check in with them and do things, even if it is virtual, that promote a sense of community and connection.
Yeah, and I think we underestimate how much connection we can get.
Mhm,
And, I'm fully remote. The people that I work with are all over
mhm.
the world. And we do a lot of walk and talks, right?
Yes.
So that way we're not always connected to the
Mhm,
computer or sitting in a
mhm.
chair. And so
Yeah.
how can we walk and talk? But
Mhm,
I want to go back to that like sense of belonging and
mhm,
connectedness. And especially because you're in the space of culture and
mhm.
inclusion in
Yeah.
particular. And I was just working the other day in the space of onboarding
Mhm.
and rethinking how we do onboarding.
Yeah.
And I surprised myself in that as I was looking at it and under looking at the neuroscience of it and what's important for people when people are starting a new job, it's a transition. There's either anxiousness or excitement, and there's not yet safety, right? There's not
Right.
yet safety because everything's new.
Yeah.
And so actually, what do we do most of the time when we onboard, right? We spend
Yeah.
like a whole day on paperwork
Yeah.
and, reviewing the handbook and
Mhm.
doing safety training videos and whatever, lots of
Yeah.
information, right?
Yeah.
And actually, what people need the most is
Mhm.
connection. And they need like their manager or their team, like, how can
Mhm.
we sit and get to know each other's work styles?
Yeah.
How do you make decisions? What are
Yeah.
things I need to know about the way that you work? And when you
Mhm.
think about early on in relationships, when you first hire somebody,
Mhm.
how many issues come up because you don't yet know their
Oh,
style. So
right.
you interpret something and you're
Yeah.
like, was that a criticism? Was
Mhm.
that did I do it wrong? Like, you're
Right.
constantly on guard because you don't yet know the other person.
That's
And if
right.
we just took the time from the beginning to go, "Hey, what's your style?
Yeah.
How do you best communicate?"
Mhm.
And as I was doing that with one of my clients, she gets overwhelmed by lots of words.
Mhm.
So, that was interesting that I learned. And she would prefer things to hear them over recording, like auditorily.
Mhm.
And so I had to send her a detailed email, and
Mhm.
then I recorded it for her.
Mhm.
And then I said, "Don't get overwhelmed.
Mhm.
I'm in control of everything,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna send you the recording." And she was like, "Wow, that was so conscious of her because she has childhood traumas of learning and too much
Right.
information and
Mhm.
of her patterns." And so I'm curious from your perspective
Mhm.
and your expertise in the inclusion
Mhm.
space, what you see in terms of organizations trying to create more practices like
Mhm.
this that
Mhm.
create that belonging and that sense of inclusion and
Yeah.
that connection
Yeah.
versus just focusing on the execution.
Yeah. I'm actually the a host of our new employee welcome. And I can tell you a lot of thought and effort goes into trying to create that connection. We've been on a journey. Originally, it was virtual, and they would do like wine tasting, and they would literally ship
Oh,
wine,
wow.
charcuterie board to everyone home. They would do cooking classes and things like that. But while that is really good, um, we wanted to bring employees back together in person experience, and those have been the most rewarding sessions for me to be part of. In our executive team, or we have segments, different ones come in, but we design it with connection in mind. So the theme is built on a theme of class of. So like they're a cohort and they have like a yearbook with about them, pictures and fun facts and all the activities and things we do during those 2.5 days together, all about connection. So one year we did it in New Mexico and we had an ice cream social and a piano bar. That I'll never forget. It was so the vibe and the environment fostered getting to know one another. So that was our evening. Then during the actual sessions during the day, like one time I had gave them the card and it was a contest. You had to collect as many initials as possible from people in the room, but you had to have a conversation with them to get them to sign it, get to know them, get to know, and that fostered a lot of competition because we were going to do a drawing and it was going to win. But again, it was forcing them because they didn't know each other. So we were coming together for 2.5 days. That was a way to break the ice, get to know someone. And then within those sessions, everything is about connection. Even if they're learning about a specific part of the business, we design it in a way where they're having to interact and connect. And by the end of that session, it was so many relationships built. Even for dinner, you know how you have these big groups and you go out to dinner and you can only talk to the people who are sitting right at you at this long table. And you look down and there's all these people on this, and you can't talk to them because they're down there. Well, what we did was um, we gave everybody cards, $30, $40 cards, and we walked over to it's like a food court, one of those locations. All they have in there is different restaurants. And we had the room booked upstairs so we can pick our food. Everybody got to pick their genre of food, go around, and then come up to that room. We were sharing food, we were tasting, we were connecting, we were bonding. And so the whole thing, the whole event is designed through that lens of connectedness.
Mm.
And we challenge one another. Look, let's keep it going. Let it not be the last time I hear from you. So I try to model this, and I call them quick connect. And they're usually like 15, 20 minutes. And then I say, imagine we were in the office and I'm stopped by your cue. That's what these are. And so we're not talking about work. I'm just getting to know you. And people know me for this. I do this.
I love that.
People don't necessarily know Rhoda. They know of me because of my role, but they've not had one-on-one time with me. So I do that a lot. And I also have recently been trying to increase my own uh, competence around different cultures. And so I connected with one-on-one several employees with different cultures and different ethnic backgrounds only to learn about their culture.
Mm.
And those conversations have been super powerful. And guess what it leads? Them asking me questions about mine. So we're learning in a safe way and we're connecting it to the workplace. Like, what challenges have you run into because of this cultural practice you have? For example, one of my colleagues is Asian, and she said in the Asian community, women only speak normally when they're invited to. So, well, how does that play out in the meeting? Well, sometimes they have to pretend to be who they're not, and they have to suppress what they've learned from their culture so that they can show up differently because then they're being judged because they're too quiet.
Yeah.
And we make these assumptions that they're just too quiet. And we pass over these people for promotion because we make these judgments and not understanding. That doesn't speak to their level of competence, their leadership ability, or anything. That's just who they are and how they've been reared based upon the ethnicity in their community and how the traditions that they have.
So
I said a lot.
powerful. No, I mean, that's so powerful because I think so often we don't seek out those perspectives. And I couldn't agree with you more. The more I learn about other people's stories, the better it informs me and the more
Right,
empathetic and compassionate
right,
I can be, the more I can understand, and the more I can give people the benefit of the doubt
right,
too, right? I'm not so quick to judge or quick
right,
to assume something because I don't know. I don't know their whole
right,
story and I don't and I think sometimes we hesitate because we're worried we're gonna offend, so we
mhm,
don't ask or we
right,
don't engage.
mhm,
And in my experience, it's been the opposite. When I've
right,
engaged and asked,
yeah,
um, it's been received well. Like, "Oh, you wanna learn more
mhm,
about me?" And people actually love to talk about themselves.
yeah,
So, it can be a really powerful practice. So, I love that you guys do that.
yeah,
I think it's I wish more people would do that. I wish
right,
more people would engage in that way, but I don't know if a lot of people have the toolkit, right?
right,
To how do
mhm,
you how do you do that in an
right,
authentic way
yeah,
and be present
yeah.
and really listen and really understand the other person, especially with our ever decreasing attention span?
Yeah, yeah. So when we do sessions, design them, we usually incorporate something like that. There are breakout rooms, I call them pair and share, and we're pairing up people and we give them conversation starters. So that's one way of doing it. We've also done things like speed networking,
Mm,
where you get to know one another and then you move to the next room and get to know someone
love
else.
that.
Um, but to be honest with you, learn these things about people to the point you've made, and it creates these new connections, and it also, in some instances, leads to some form of bonding. Like one of my colleagues, she's Jewish, and I wanted to learn more about the Jewish community. And I learned through the conversation she loved theater, and I think I love theater, right? I love theater. If I can do life over again, I would have been on Broadway, etcetera. No, she loves theater. Like, she started asking me, "Are you familiar with this director?" And she have flown to New York by herself to see shows. I was like, "Ooh, I'm learning so much from her." And we now have started reading books together. And she's recommending books for me, and I'm recommending books for her, and then we come together and talk about it. That beauty of connecting with people outside of what you normally would connect with, and that's really what it's all about, to the point
Mm.
you made, because once you get to know someone personally, you're now you're jaded. And so you're gonna see them through a different lens. You're gonna give them the benefit of the doubt because you have this relationship. And if we did that just one networking opportunity at a time throughout our lives, every opportunity we get, and we all started doing that, it has a domino effect. And before you know it, you don't need programs like DEI. You don't need it because this is a human centric thing. So it's just organic and it can really foster kindness and forgiveness and grace.
Yeah, and one way I like to look at it, and I love the last thing you just said of like when we create these connections, then you don't need some of those structures,
Mhm.
is it creates this cultural intelligence.
Yeah,
It creates this collective ability that we can't achieve on our own. We
yeah,
only achieve it. And if you've ever worked in like a group to create something new or design something, and everybody's kind of adding different
right.
ideas and perspectives, it's 1,000 times better than when someone
Yeah,
tries to do something on their own, right? When
yeah,
we bring all these different lenses together. And that's part of like the theory around, having leadership teams and having organizations and having the diversity of perspective
yeah,
and diversity of experience. That's what I
yeah,
always talk about. Diversity of different experiences.
mhm,
That is what brings so much value. That's the innovation, that's the creativity.
yeah,
And I think to kind of go back to the topic around the workplace
mhm,
and the trauma elements is in order to create that, we have to create safety first,
Yes.
because if we don't have safety, then if it's not safe to show
Mhm.
up in that
Mhm.
way,
Mhm.
then we don't ever get to the
It
creativity.
don't.
We don't
Mhm.
ever get to the courageous action taking.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so the solutions aren't as wise as they might
Right.
otherwise be, right?
It's so true. Because if we don't feel safe, we're not showing up as our true authentic self, therefore not tapping into that level of our creativity where we can contribute to those innovative ideas and problem solving needed. You're so true. The very base of a good culture is psychological safety.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, I would go one step further, which is I say it's embodied safety.
Yes.
So it's not just like I think I'm safe, it's that
Right. Feel.
I feel
Mhm.
it. Because one of the things I find, and I'm curious of your perspective on
Mhm.
this, is that people can say the right things,
Mhm.
but it doesn't feel right.
They
They
say the
say the
word,
Yep,
but
they
they
say the
their
words.
actions are different. Yeah.
Yeah, or even just their
Mhm.
presence, right?
Yeah.
Like, they're
Mhm.
saying the right thing, but, like, their tone is off, their
Yeah.
body language is off,
Yeah.
and you just go, "Oh, that doesn't feel true. That
Mhm.
doesn't feel like." I love the example of, like, "We want to hear your opinions. I want you to come to me with
Mhm.
your
Right.
complaints and your criticisms." And there are leaders that mean that, and there
Yeah.
are leaders that do not. They mean
Mhm.
that so that they can fire you, right? Like,
Right.
they
Right.
don't mean that because
Mhm.
they want to
Right.
improve. They
Right.
mean it for a totally different
Different
reason.
reason. Mhm.
And so we have to trust that our what we're sensing is
Right.
it is telling us something,
Mhm.
and then we have to help leaders learn
Mhm.
how to actually be safe, not
Yes.
just say the right things.
Right. Be safe. I always say I never wanna be the reason why an employee is not looking forward to coming to work, who and they're full of anxiety, and they're afraid, thinking that, they gotta fight for their job, and if they make a mistake, this is gonna be the day. I never wanna be that person that's causing another person to have not be able to rest and be at peace. And to me, if the leaders looked at things that way, and if they looked at, well, what would they want to experience? What would make their lives be at peace? Because, most of us we have to work, and a lot of us have to work to the last minute where we can't work anymore, um, all the way up to sometime age 70. What can we do as leaders to make what most of us have to do be as pleasant as possible? I'm not saying don't hold people accountable. I'm not saying don't hold them to a standard, because to me, caring, you can be kind, and I can hold you accountable, and I can be kind doing so. And because I care about you, I'm going to hold you accountable. So I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is, how do we lead in a more human centric way? And the question leaders need to ask themselves is, what do I want to be known for? What When I'm done, when it's all said and done, and I've left this organization or exited Earth, what do I want people to remember about me and my leadership when it comes to work? What do I want to be known for? What is my legacy? And whatever the answer is to that, then those are your driving points. That drives the actions you take and how you entreat others in the experience that you lead them with.
Well, and I think an interesting exercise for leaders to do along those lines
Mhm,
is when they're, because one of the things I see
mhm.
is I see that leaders will say, "Well, nobody showed me how to do it. They got to figure it out to be tough." Or
Right.
they've got to, like, there's this judgment, or
Mhm,
and so one of the things I encourage leaders to do is to hold up a mirror,
mhm,
and whatever they are saying about or thinking about
mhm,
other people,
mhm.
to look at it as if they were saying it or thinking about it about themselves,
Right.
and if they were experiencing it themselves, because usually it's a reflection, right? Or
Mhm.
the things that we judge other people for are things that we struggle with ourselves. The
Yeah.
things that frustrate us in other people are usually things that bother us
Mhm.
about ourselves.
Mhm.
And so creating that kind of awareness
Mhm.
is important so that our intention is aligned with who we want to be, not
Yes.
who we think we should be
Should be.
or
Mhm.
who we think we have to be because of what we've endured or what we've
Right.
experienced before. So
Yeah.
we don't keep repeating bad patterns.
Right.
And you said something interesting about accountability and holding people accountable. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is when we tell people we're going to hold them accountable, it creates this fight, flight, survival
Mhm.
response, right? And so one of the skill sets that we really
Mhm.
need leaders to develop
Mhm.
is how to cultivate
Mhm.
an accountability mindset in their
Mindset.
people so that their people are committing to and actually have what they need to deliver and
Mhm.
take responsibility.
And they're
Because
holding themselves
and
accountable.
they're holding themselves accountable.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, the reason people don't take responsibility is because they never committed in the first place,
Right.
or they didn't have the capabilities they need
Mhm.
to be successful,
Mhm.
or they didn't understand what
Right.
exactly it was they were supposed
Right.
in the
Mhm.
first place.
Most people wanna do the right thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So how do you develop that in
Right.
people so they
Yeah.
have that skill set?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that not a lot of people know how to do.
Mhm. Yeah. That's always been a question. Is effective leadership innate or can it be taught? And I'm still on the fence with that. I lean towards it's innate. You either have those attributes and care about people because of your DNA and the way you are wired as a human, or you don't get it because it's too many that don't get it.
Yeah.
uh,
I mean, you go back to what you said earlier about the rewiring of patterns,
yeah.
right? And the way that I look at it is, of course, there are going to be some people that have more natural tendencies,
Mhm.
right? They have a set of strengths and talents that lend
Yeah.
themselves to being more effective as a leader. They're charismatic or they're well spoken or whatever the things are. And also the things that keep people from being a more effective leader are usually those same past patterns,
Yeah.
are usually those same wounds. And so what I actually try to do is call everyone to be a leader because
Mhm.
the truth is we all have to lead our own lives. We have to lead our families. We have to lead our children. We have to lead our communities.
Mhm.
And so by instead of saying only some people can lead,
Right.
that places kind of the
You lay on everyone.
yeah, it's like, "Oh, well, they need to lead me better.
Right.
They need to do a better job." And instead of, "You know what? I can lead better."
Right.
And what's holding me back from leading better?
Yeah. And
And
they can
how
they can
yeah,
even lead up. They
yeah,
can even manage up, and their leaders can learn from them. And not only do they hold themselves accountable, but I'm gonna hold my leader accountable.
yeah,
So yeah. Mhm.
100%. I mean, one of the things I think that would be so beautiful is if those relationships became partnerships.
Yeah.
And rather than a delegation or a director or a one-way flow,
Right.
who are we working together to get where we want to go?
You let's describe my leadership style. It is a true partnership. That's
And
the
that
culture I try to offer. Yeah.
and that's the difference between, I think,
Yeah.
successful leadership
Yeah.
and leadership that's built on fear
Yeah.
or leadership that's built on control or
Yeah.
leadership that's built on your wounds and how do
Yeah.
you how a and how it manifests then in
Mhm.
those different
Mhm.
styles.
So true. So true.
That would be an interesting exercise to do sometime is to
Mhm.
map how different childhood attachment or wounds lead to
And
toxic leadership styles.
yeah, there would be. Yeah.
Well, Rhoda, thank you so, so
Mhm.
much. I've loved this conversation. I
Yeah.
know that Your book is coming out soon. We
Mhm.
will include a link in the show notes when we release this episode so people can go out and get it. Before we kind of wrap up, remind us one more time the name of your book, and also if you have any words of wisdom, final thoughts, something you'd like to share with our listeners as we
Mhm.
wrap this up.
Yes, so the book is called Daughter of an Assassin. It's a memoir by Rhoda Banks. It is actually gonna be on sale on Amazon. You can get a copy on Amazon. May the 15th is the release date, and why I chose that date, it is National Family Day. And so at the core of what this book is about family and patterns within family. And so I look forward to that release and look forward to becoming a number one bestseller on Amazon. The only way I can get there is people buy the book. It will be available on Kindle, hard copy as well. Eventually, I will do an audiobook. So looking forward to all of that. Words that I would leave to the listening audience is one is to believe in yourself. And I know that's easier said than done. But I have spent too much of my time in life looking for um, confirmation or information from others instead of from within. And I believe that when we remove limiting beliefs, when we remove those things, and we could, like the sky isn't even the limit. Like there is no telling where Rhoda Banks would be if I didn't have those limiting beliefs. So I challenge everyone to do some reflection, identify and perhaps undertake try to understand deeply what some of those limiting beliefs are. If you don't have the capacity or the toolkit yourself to reframe or unwire those thinking patterns, invest in a coach. Coaches are trained to help you do that. So it is a huge benefit, and those are really like the words of wisdom I would like to leave people is to remove unlimiting belief so that they can live their their fullness, so that they can walk in the fullness, in the true purpose that they were meant to be here on earth. I like to say that there's a one in like 400 billion chance of you being born. If you made it on earth, you have a purpose. And we shouldn't waste any more time not walking in it. So, whatever's hindering you from tapping into your purpose and your passion, let's get rid of it and find the resources or that can help you do so.
Oh, I absolutely love that. One of my biggest regrets was not getting a coach sooner in my career. So I think that's a powerful bit of advice for all of our listeners. I just want to thank you for tuning in,
Yeah.
remind you and challenge you to look at the workplace challenges we're facing today through a more informed lens
And
and to look at how we can upgrade them. How can we upgrade them to really address what we know is important to true human-centric
yeah.
leadership like you've talked about, Rhoda. So, thank you so much for listening, and to all our listeners, just a reminder to always keep evolving, keep growing, keep rewiring those neural pathways so that you can live an exceptional life, the best life possible. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll be back again next week with another episode.